Okay.
What's up, guys? Tim also with DragBoss Garage. Welcome back to the channel for a great live chat with Scott Shafiroff. I appreciate you guys being here tonight, taking time away from your families and whatever you're doing in the garage to spend with DragBoss at DragBoss Garage. I appreciate my wife giving me the time to spend with Scott and the rest of the guys that are on here. Daniel Wilson, let's see, Rotor 22, Terry Grover's here. Appreciate that. Bill Fioretti, glad you're here. But I appreciate you guys being here. If it wasn't for you, I wouldn't be able to do this kind of stuff and bring these legends to life right in front of your eyes, where we can sit and listen to a man who's been around racing since I was going to the bathroom in my pants. I can tell you that, okay? So there's not much of an age difference, Scott, but there is. I'll be 59 next month. How old are you right now?
Well, I'm 74. I'll be 75 in September. Yeah.
You don't look a day over 73. You know?
No.
But so Scott Shafiroff is here. Now, I'll tell you, he's the kid from New York City. And I had put that on one of the videos that I had made for you. And one of the subscribers said, I don't know what you're talking about or something like that. He's not from New York City. He's from Long Island. I said, really? I guess he just put that on his car, you know, but whatever. No. So where are you from? New York City or Long Island, Scott?
New York City.
There it is.
I was born in Manhattan. And
nice.
My parents, I just was born there in the hospital and came home to Queens. And that's when my parents had their first house. My dad had gotten out of the service and bought a house in Queens, and I was brought home there. So I lived my whole life in Queens, which for those of you that aren't so familiar with New York City is actually the 5 boroughs, and Manhattan is just one of the boroughs. But when you come from New York and you use the term the city,
Manhattan,
you meant Manhattan, like
right?
Queens or Brooklyn or the Bronx or Staten Island. You go into the city, see the shows, do this, do something. That's where the action was. You went to the city, and that was Manhattan. But I lived in Queens, which was New York City. And the island is, see, Queens and Brooklyn are actually physically part of the island, but they're considered New York City. And then I moved out in the 80s. I moved out on the island. Okay. And so we call that Long Island. But all the times I was racing in Pro Stock, I lived in Queens. And so it definitely was that. I was the kid.
We just got a geography lesson on the 5 boroughs, man. So we all know what they are. You know, yep. I like that. Thank you, Scott. So
no problem.
How about this one? My Son, the Drag Racer. I saw that. Is that on every car that you had?
Pretty much. I came from a background of my father was a surgeon.
What?
My brother, my uncles were surgeon. My brother was a plastic surgeon. And wow. my sister strayed. She became a lawyer, but she married a doctor, so that was okay. So, but I wasn't going to be, because I know my dad had taken me in to see operation. I had this little problem when I saw blood. I almost fainted. So I guess medicine wasn't for me. But I love cars. I loved racing, and I was a great student, and I just studied. I knew everything about it, but my real forte was driving.
Okay.
That's what I was. I was 4-speed, just loved driving 4-speeds. And, you know, in those days, nobody had automatics.
Right.
You know, all the hot rods in the 60s, everything was a 4-speed. You know, some of the Chrysler guys, they had, because the 4-speeds were so tricky. But, you know, anybody with a GM car, you had a 4-speed in the car. Okay. And that's what I considered myself, you know, a master of that. So, you know, that's how it all started. And my father was a Pontiac guy. He loved Pontiacs.
So then you were a Pontiac guy to start, I suspect.
Of course, I had to be a Pontiac guy. My dad was a Pontiac guy.
There it is.
And I started racing at a Ram 4 Firebird.
Ooh, okay.
And
what did they make for horsepower? How much were those things pushing?
Well, in those years, they were rated at 335.
Okay.
And in the GTO, they were rated 370, same engine.
Yep.
But, you know, that was part of GM's handiwork, you know, to keep everything at, you know, 10 pounds per horsepower. That was like for insurance, so you could get them insured. But, you know, that was and that's where I started. But I had been street racing. I'd actually raced on racetracks from the time I was 15.
Jesus.
And I was the guy, I drove everybody's car. I would tune them a little bit, play
Yep.
with them a little bit. But the main thing was I drove them. And in those days, we used to go out to National Speedway, and you go out there, you'd make 10, 12 time trials. You just keep running around and around and go back in the lanes, and you were out. And you could do that. Then you'd run class eliminations. I mean, on a good day, you made 15, 16 passes. And then during the week, there was a couple of places we hung out, and you'd race all night. You know, when we used to go there, you know, quarter of a tank of gas, keep the car light, and just every 4 or 5 passes, there was a Sunoco gas station. You put in like $2 worth of $2.60, just, you know, so it wouldn't run out of fuel.
How'd the thing run? I mean, did that thing when you're nailing that thing and shifting, would you run to about $6,000?
Well, the Pontiacs, yeah, $6,000 was the magic number.
Yeah.
You didn't want to go north of $6,000.
Okay.
You know, those things were hard on bearings. And
really?
That's where it had to be. And it was perfect. If you shifted at 6, they'd run forever. You tried, you know, 6,200, it was danger zone.
Really?
But I actually started racing, you know, in national event. They had one at National Speedway, and it was just an AHRA national event. And they had classes there that, you know, pounds per cubic inch.
Yep.
And it was, you know, heads up. You had a 9-pound class, a 10-pound class, and on. So I had this, it was a 400 cubic inch motor, and it was 9 pounds per cube. The car had to weigh 3,600 pounds. I mean, those cars weighed with, you know, stock
3,400,
3,400.
Yeah.
But I had to put weight in the car to make it. I had to slow it down. I hated that. And then you go out there, you're racing against Camaros with, you know, 302s or mostly 327s, or even because there were stock classes, you know, everything had to be original.
Okay.
And so they had like a 350 cubic inch or a 327, but I'm just hundreds and hundreds of pounds heavier. And there was no way. The Pontiac, as good as it was for what it was, there was no way you could race that in a heads-up class.
Okay.
So that's when I realized that, you know, I can't do this Pontiac stuff anymore. I had to switch. And I built my GT car, which was a 68 Camaro. Okay. And it was a factory Z28. And I put an ad in the newspapers, wanted 67 to 69 Camaro. Doesn't even have to be in running condition. I just wanted a clean body.
Yep.
And that's because I'd already started. I had it, you know, was building an engine. I had a 12-bolt rear. I had transmissions, clutches. I just needed a body. So the kid calls me from Brooklyn. He said, "Oh, I got the fastest Z28 in Brooklyn." I said, "Well, that's cool. I don't really need a great." He said, so I go down there, and this thing could hardly turn the tires on wet leaves. I mean, it was bad. This thing was a dog. I don't know what this kid thought he had, but it was a red Z28.
Yep.
And I had already had the other motor so I didn't even use the motor. So I sold the motor for a few $100, the 4-speed a few $100, the rear end. I sold everything out of the car, and I think I virtually broke even. I got the car for nothing. You know, I paid like $1,800 for the car, and I sold all the parts. I got all the money back, and then I had all the stuff that I was building, and that started my heads-up racing career, and that's where I got national notoriety. I was like the kid on the local level, because like everybody, they knew me because I worked in a local speed shop and was going to college at the same time.
Yeah.
But basically, cars is what I wanted to do. And, you know, I went to school. My parents wanted me to go to school, and I pretty much did that for them. But, you know, I wanted to race. And once I built that Camaro, and like they say, I took my act on the road. I used to flat toe. The first race you know, NMW toe tabs.
Yeah.
You know, those little tabs in the front.
Yeah.
Well, I towed my car everywhere with that. I towed to St. Louis with NMW toe tabs.
Wow.
and it wasn't until the middle of almost 72 that I finally got a trailer. Everything else I just flat towed. And you know, I'd take the Camaro. I used to change all 4 tires. You know, obviously you don't tow with the slicks, and even the front tires. You couldn't tow with those little skinny front tires, because if it ever rained, the car wouldn't follow. Oh, so I used to put all the tires, and I had a station wagon, and I towed with a station wagon, and I had a mattress made that fit in the back of the station wagon. So me and 2 of my friends, so that's how we rotated all around the country. You could have the driver, you have a guy shotgun to keep him awake, and the guy in the back slept. So I made it so it was comfortable in the car. We put everything in the race car and just towed it. You know, we didn't have toolboxes, you know, had a little Honda generator for the battery, and that's what you had, and you raced. And it was a great time. And that's where I started to really get, you know, some national exposure and all the magazines. My dad loved that stuff. And whenever it came out on the newsstand, like magazine,
right there.
And he'd go into and he'd buy like a dozen copies or whatever they had, and he'd bring them into the hospital and show all his friends, you know, that's my son. So he said, that's my son, the drag racer, you know, instead of saying my son, the doctor, you know.
Yeah.
And my brother was a doctor, but I was the drag racer. So,
nice.
You know, and that's where it all grew, and expanded it from there.
Wow. So after the Camaro, that's when you hit with the SRD Vegas, like 73, 74.
Yeah, I raced the Camaro. I started it in the middle of 71.
Yep.
And by the end of 71, I won my first national event. It was like the third or fourth race I'd gone to.
Okay.
And I think I was runner-up once, and then I went to the final out in Pomona, in Fremont. Well, not Pomona, it was Fremont, near San Francisco. And I'll never forget, you know, it's funny, people say you always remember your first. Well, I still remember my first national event win. And I remember plugging that thing in the high gear, looking over, and I could see his fender by my door, and I said, that's it. This is it. And I remember I was like beating on the steering wheel. I still remember it. It was like 54 years ago, and I remember beating on the steering wheel and going through the lights, and it was the first 10-second run that nobody had been in the 10s. And I went 10:95. So I still have that time slip framed over my desk at work.
I love that.
And I came back. So this is 1971.
Yeah.
And come back to the pits. Everybody's all cheering. They're all happy. Everybody from there. And I said, I gotta go. I gotta call. You know, we didn't have cell phones. I had to find a phone booth at the racetrack. At Puma.
And then it was
Fremont. So I got in a phone booth. I said I had to make a collect call. So I called home. I called my father, and I remember saying, Dad, I won. And he had backed me and supported me. And he was old. My mom wasn't so sure about the racing, but my dad was really cool. And he used to help. We used to bet on my street racing before I started, you know, all that fancy racing. We'd go out Friday, Saturday night. My dad was always first out of the house. You know, he had a surgeon. They had to be at the hospital real. So at night, he would like leave a 10 or a 20 on the kitchen table, and I would take it and would go out late. You know, we didn't leave the house till 10:30.
Right.
Because all the street racing started 11:30 because all the cops, the shift changed at midnight. So every cop had to be back at the station house by 11:15. So from 11:15 to 12:30, it was the wild, wild west. There were no cops. And it was just wide open. So we all raced. And we always, you know, raced for money. So my daddy, and if I came home, if I won, if he left a 10, I'd put 2 10s on the table. And if I lost, which didn't happen often, but then it would be nothing. So he was up early. So he never even had to ask, how'd we do? He knew if there was 2 bills on the table, we won. If there was only 1 bill on the table, we didn't get a race. And we sent the thing back. But,
what were you racing? What were you racing?
God. Mostly Pontiacs. I had a lot of friends that had Pontiacs. So I was really cool with that.
Tri-power stuff? Tri-power stuff?
Tri-power wasn't really that fast. It was faster with a 4-barrel. And besides driving my cars, I had a bunch of guys that I drove at 396, 375s, and I used to tune those and race them for them. I ran that. I had a Corvette that I put an LS6 in, and that thing was fast. That was, you know, actually ran in the 10s. And it was, you know, at the time faster than my race car. But, you know, my race car was set up for a class.
Right.
And I had to, you know, it was a big block Corvette. And we swapped it. It was a factory 454, 390. Yep. And over one weekend, I had built it, you know, got a short block from Chevrolet, which is kind of how we did it. Got a set of heads from Tony File. That's where I started with Tony. And put this thing together with a General Kinetic solid lifter cam. Yep. And this thing, I think it went like 1070s, 1080s. and with slicks.
That's
and it
fast.
would run 1130, 1140 with street tires, which is how we raced it on the street.
Okay.
And I only raced it with slicks once, because in a Corvette, if you had slicks and a 4-speed and you power shifted it, it was only a question of when you spit the half shafts out.
Yep.
So you were very careful racing stock Corvettes in those days. But it was a lot of fun. I mean, the stories are endless. What we did on the street and how we raced, and all the wild stories are true that you heard from New York. And I was just like this little innocent kid, but I had a lot of friends that weren't so innocent, and they backed me up. And street racing was pretty wild. But we wound up racing, even when I was racing Pro Stock, and after, big money stuff, 40, 50, once 80,000 raced down in Florida. So there was a lot of good racing in between. But you got to, there I was, 23, 24 years. I was 23 when I started racing Pro Stock. And I had thousands of passes under my belt already, which kids today can't do. You go to the track, they give you one-time shot, when you break out first run, you go home. You would sit there for 9 hours and you drove 4 hours to get to, and you made one run. We'd drive out 45 minutes and just race all day. And you got a lot of experience. And, there wasn't bracket racing. So every single pass that we made that I never made a pass without trying to do something to make the car go faster. Because we didn't care about consistency. We were trying to go faster. So you always change something, and that's where you learned. And even to this day, I teach kids that work on my shop, when you tune on a dyno, you have to change one thing at a time. You just don't know. And you have to do what I called ABA testing. You try something and you think it went faster. You're not. So if you change it back and it slows down, then because other factors come into place. You make this change, but the weather changed or something, temperature or the track up, and you would never be sure until you ABA'd it. So you learned how to really tune. We didn't have dynos.
Right.
We had racetracks, and we used to tune on the street. There was a place by where I lived. It was a long highway, and it was uphill. And you pull on the entrance, and that would be the starting line. And you leave from the starting line, and you get up to the crest of the hill. And at the very top of the hill, you'd look down at the speedometer. And let's say back then we had cars that would go like 104, 105. You're looking at the speedometer, not even like that. And 104, 105, and you crest the hill, and then you lift it, because you didn't even know who was on the other side of the hill. So you come back around, and you get your timing light out. You do this, you change that. You bring it around, you go up the hill. And if you went 104, now you went 105, you did good. If it went 103, not so good. You changed it back. So it was, it was so different. It was limited to what you could do. This stuff wasn't available, and you certainly didn't have dynos. My whole life, even in all the years in Pro Stock, I never had an engine on a dyno in a Pro Stock car.
Wow.
And I tested different cubic inches. We built different strokes. Camshafts, I had a lot of friends at Cam Dynamics, helped me a lot with camshafts, and we're always trying cams. And we used to test them at the track. We would set up 3 cams. We didn't have Jessel belt drives. It was a timing chain. It had a little bushing. You degree the cam in.
Yep.
And Fords were easy because the harmonic balances were pretty loose. We honed them a little. You could just slide the balancer up. You could come back. In 45 minutes, you had another cam you were running. And so we would make Vinny Vinny Knapp owned Englishtown, and we were pretty good friends at the time. And he always had a special lane for me by the fence. And whenever I told him I was coming out to test, he would just give me that lane. And he said, whenever you're ready, just tell the guys, and they'll stop and they'll let you out. So I'd be able to make 6, 7 runs in a day. And I would go out and make 2 runs, and I seated the pants, because like I said, my forte was driving. And we didn't have computers. We didn't read look at the computer screen. It was the seat of your pants. What did you feel? And just drive it down the track. And I knew if it was a really good run, if it moved a little bit, maybe it dropped 100th here or something. but I knew that was it, and I'd come and I'd make the run. And what I would do is I would, in 4-speeds, I would hold third gear until I'd feel the thing shut off. You know, almost your head would go forward, then pull fourth. Now that told me where the cam was happy, what RPM it was happy at. It didn't affect the ET because by the time you were in the top of third into fourth, it didn't matter if you overwhelmed third. You were going what you were going. So I'd look at the ETs, look at the, you know, we didn't have any of this stuff. We didn't have 2 steps. It's hard to imagine. Could you imagine me leaving a line at 10,000 RPM? There was no 2-step. You didn't floor the gas pedal. You held it. You listened in your ear. It was a pitch. And that's how you left. You know, you had attack, which you could, you know, see. I mean, we were shifting these things. The Chevys were, you know, high 8s, and the Fords were 92, 9300. We shifted the Fords. But everything was seat of the pants and what you felt. And you came back and said, you know, I can feel it's a little lean. You know, we didn't tune clutches and shocks back then. It was just, it was too early. You know, the clutch was there not to slip. That was, you know, that was a joke. That was, you know, you put a disc only to make sure it wouldn't slip. You rev that thing up, so it was a whole totally different thing for chassis. But and that's how we learned with cam shift. So at the end of the day, you tested 3 cams. You look at the ET cards. And usually they'd be very close, but I'd always pick the one where it went the highest RPM in third. And you knew that was the smoothest one. You know, that was our own Spintron back there. That's what we had. And so it was just so different. And without, you know, without any of these, you know, electronics, no way to view it afterwards. It was really the best guys were drivers. And they had to have a real feel for the car. And, you know, it wasn't just a kid driving it and everybody worked on it. And this guy did the clutch and this guy did the shocks and you read the. So it was a whole different animal. And we didn't get to race much back then. In those years, there was only, I believe, 8 national events. From, you know, I only raced Pro Stock 73, 74, 75, 76.
Yep. And,
you know, you didn't get that. We made our living match racing. And I love match racing because, you know, we could fly. Nobody was fast. I guarantee you. I went 850s in 75. And you know, all these guys in my buddy, they would come over and look and say, what the hell is this? And I mean, I carried almost 300 pounds of weight in the car. And so we could take weight out. And I built one stroker motor that I only used for match racing. And as a matter of fact, I lent that motor to Don Nicholson. He broke everything he had at one point, and he was going to run Comp Eliminator, and he needed a motor to run English. So I lent him my match race motor. I don't know if he won it, but it was awfully fast. I think it was.
What was it based on? A Cleveland?
Yeah, no, they're all Clevelands. They just put a 750 stroke crank in it. You know, back then we raced all stock cranks. You know, the 3.5, and I had one 3.4. I think it was like. 3.480, you know, something slightly de-stroked, but we didn't go with the really small cubic inch motors, and I had pretty much, you know, I kind of saw the handwriting on the wall in '76, and that's when I decided that I was going to go a different direction. I knew all these guys, and Dino Don was like, I used to watch Dino, and he was a great racer. He taught me a lot. I used to be a perfectionist. And if it wasn't perfect, I didn't want to race it. And Don said, "You race what you got." And you know, he would go to a drag race, no help. His wife would sit in the front seat of the cab. He had no help. He'd go out, I remember, in front of the stands. He'd hold up a hammer and a screwdriver. And he would go up to the crowd. He says, "Anybody know what this stuff is?" And if you knew a hammer and a screwdriver, you were his man. And he would just get somebody to help him change the tires. You know, we didn't use parachutes, you know, the back road. It was just, you know, change the tires, fill the gas, fire up the Honda generator, and charge the battery, and push you up onto the lawn. And you know, and that's what people had. And I remember his truck, and the dashboard of his truck was filled with Tums. He just ate and lived on Tums. And I said, you know, and then there were guys that race Pro Stock, a lot of the Chrysler, you know, some of the Chrysler guys and some other racers, these guys were older. They had a business. They made some money. They bought good equipment. They raced. They had a great time. You know, they weren't as serious. I mean, they were serious in their mind, but they had a job. I mean, my job was racing the car. And there wasn't anything that went through your head other than thinking about the car, thinking about the engines, getting everything ready, driving all over the country, match racing, swapping. That was your life. That's what you did. The guys that had a really good business and they could afford to hire a mechanic, and they liked racing, and they were good drivers. They were always that little step down. They couldn't rise. A guy like Glidden, they didn't call him Mad Dog. I mean, this man worked like 10 men, you know, and Roush was just smart. And Wayne was a great driver. Jack not so much. He'll tell you that. That wasn't his forte. But you know, and you know, we all hung together. See, that was on dyno. When we went to national events, we knew, like the last race, you know, where were we relative to Jenkins or Gap, you know, or Glidden? Where were we in the field? So you judged how you were doing based on where you were next to these guys. And you know, everybody knew where they stood. And racing, you know, we didn't get reaction time. There was no such thing. We had 60-foot, quarter mile, and mile an hour. That's what we had. That's all we had. We didn't get a reaction time. We didn't know if you were late or early. The only way you knew you were late is that if you went faster and you lost, you were late. You know, and it was different, you know, and red lighting, you never wanted to lose. Although Nicholson always had to say, he'd say, you know, if you don't red light every once in a while, you're just not leaving soon enough. You know, and the associations tried different ways. They went to, it was originally 5/10, and then it went down to 4. NHRA even tried 3/10.
Really? Yep.
Which was ridiculous. Because when you had a fast car, the guy next to, he would like put the thing up and like count to 3 and just let the clutch out, because he knew the starter was gonna let the tree fly. But on a 3/10 tree, you could leave before the yellow came on and not foul.
Right.
You know, so everybody was taking shots at you. If you were a fast car, you knew the guy next to you was going to take a shot, because he couldn't beat your heads up, but damn, he can make you look stupid on the starting line. And you know, and the guys, General Lee was real good. The guys with the handbrakes, they'd like roll in, and they would just be ready. And back then, it wasn't electronic. The starter hit the button and that activated the tree. Sure. It wasn't a timer deal. No, so the starters listened to the two cars, and he would give the guys time to get the motors up there, and he'd hear both motors at pitch, and then it'd let you go. So so you knew the cadence of the starter. And the different starters had different cadence. You know, some of them would juggle, make you sit there, but nobody wanted you to hurt the motor. They wouldn't let you sit there. You know, they had to let you go. So if you were guessing, you knew it's going to be now, because you could hear both motors. You know, we had $5 helmets. You know? We raced in shorts and sneakers and T-shirts, no gloves, and a $5 helmet. You wore your bicycle on, you know, and that's what we raced in Pro Stock. You know, it wasn't until, you know, they started with some real safety rules. I mean, parachutes, never used a parachute. You know, even 158 back, we never used parachutes. There was one on the car, the rules, you know, but I don't know if it ever would have worked if I ever tried it. It sat there for so long. But it was all about preparation and learning how to run a race car operation, especially just it was me and one guy. You know, not just the race car, the rigs. Just get to the races.
Cleveland. So you raced, yes. You built your own Clevelands.
Yeah.
So you use regular blocks, whatever you could find, after you probably sonic checked a few.
And so when I switched to Ford, and I switched to Ford in right after the 74 season.
Yes.
And I had my Vega in 73 and 74.
Yep.
And there was always, Jenkins was always like a tenth quicker than me, and it was Blevins and Ron Hutter and myself. We were basically the fastest cars, but Jenkins was always faster. And you know, and he's a great guy, and I love Bill. But I think it was I guess it was in the 74 season, we found out one of the things that Bill had. And if you guys remember back then in Pro Stock, you had to run the stock cylinder head. We never had an aluminum head, you know, or an aftermarket head. You had to run the stock head. And on a small block Chevy, the best head that they had was the LT1 head. That's what came on Z28, the 350 in 1970. And that had studs and guide plates, and it was a straight plug head. That was the best head. We were allowed to fill the spark plug hole and then drill and tap it over and make it an angle plug head. That was legal because it was the stock casting. You were allowed to modify where the spark plug was. But everything else, the casting number on the head had to be there. Externally, it had to be a Chevrolet head.
Yep.
So what Chevrolet did, and they were working, and I think Bill was involved in some of the designing, the turbo head, which was a famous head if you were a Chevrolet guy. It was the 292 casting, revolutionized the small block Chevy.
Really?
And they were working on it. So they made, in the casting, they kept the LT1 exterior, even the casting number, but the inner plug, the runners in the chamber, was the turbo head. And this thing was night and day. And I believe there were only 6 of them in existence. And Bill had 2 sets. And Chevrolet, because they wanted Bill to, you know, he was their boy, and he helped design it. I guess he had first dibs on it.
Okay. But
we were the next best, you know, Chevy next to Bill. So Chevrolet came to us. They gave me a set. They gave Blevins a set, and they gave Ron Hutter a set. And we immediately picked up a 10th. Immediately. Really? And but it was a little too late. It was right at the end of the 74 season. And I, you know, just looking at the rules, and I just decided, you know, instead of fighting the Fords, because the Fords were just dominant. They were playing with us. And I said, the hell with it. I'm going to switch. And I didn't know anything about Fords. And of course, I'll tell you I did have my mom, I used to order the cars. I ordered my father's car, and I ordered my mother's car, and I helped my brother get a car. And my sister, she was 5 years younger. She got a car. So I was like the master of ceremonies with all the cars. And after my dad got done with Pontiacs, my next door neighbor was a Dodge dealer, a salesman. He worked at a Dodge dealership. So I convinced my father, unbeknownst, that he really needed a street Hemi in 1966. That's what he needed to go to the hospital. He needed a street Hemi. So we ordered. I had one of the first 66 street I had. My dad had 66 street Hemi, you know, and I was the Pontiac guy, and I was racing my Ram F4, and had a big block Corvette that I, you know, made a lot of money just playing around doing engine jobs. We used to buy, you know, it's funny now people think of my business at crate engines. I hate that word. I hate that word, crate engine.
You hear it, guys. He hates it.
I hate that. But in those days, Pontiac had all these Ram Air 3s. I remember the local Pontiac had a whole wall full of them, and they were $300 each. They came with distributor wires. There was oil and filter in them. Wow. I mean, all you needed to do was put a carburetor on it, start and run. And I used to buy them. They $300. I'd put a factory Ram F4 cam in it. I'd leave the stock rocker, so it was the standard ratio. And there was some little tricks we did to it, but most of them I never even took the heads off. We just put the cam in, set them up, and I used to rent an engine hoist. There was a Abbey rental place, you know, you could, you know, and we just did all these swaps in front of the house and just jack up the thing, pull the motor out, had the other motor, put it in, sell the guy a clutch, put headies. So over a weekend, and you know how many GTOs and Firebirds there were? Hundreds. Really? So I was a Pontiac. So I would do this, you know, and it was like, I think maybe it was like $1,200. The engine, the clutch, everything was all, but you made $500-600, which in the 60s was pretty good money.
Good money.
And you know, made a lot of money doing that. And I wound up with the Corvette. So in front of my house, I had all these cars, street Hemis. Then I got my dad a 4-speed Roadrunner. But when I saw your car, I ordered for my mom a 69 Cougar XR7 with a 428 Super Cobra Jet drag pack. My mom never knew. It had white wall tires. So I ordered the car, the local Mercury dealer, and I told them, listen, it's the drag pack, but I don't want the scoop. It was like, they didn't call it an eliminator, it was a drag pack, but they used to come with a hood scoop. I said, I don't want the hood scoop, I want flat hood, stock hood. And I said, and if you can, I don't want the decals on the engine. You know how Fords had all the decals? They had fan, they had the cubic inches on the valve cover. So if you were not a Ford guy, you wouldn't know the difference between a 351 Windsor and a 428 because, you know, gee, the distributor was in the front. The valve covers were the same shape, a little different size. But if you were not a real Ford guy, you didn't know. So this car came in, and the dealer called, and I said, all right, let me see. How did it come? So they pulled the car around, and sure enough, it was beautiful, dark green, saddle leather interior. My mother loved it. You know, it was automatic. And, you know, no air conditioning back then, because you couldn't get them in a Cobra Jet. So she drove this car all the time, and it had white walls, had a 391 rear with F7014s. And I would I'd take that thing out and get more races with that because it looked like your mom's car. It even had dual exhaust from the factory, and one pipe was a little lower. So unless it was smoking, you'd swear it was single exhaust. And it was quiet, you know, it was beautiful, luxurious. And I used it as my tow car for my Firebird to tow to the racetrack.
Nice.
So and that car was cool. It went 1330s. This is 1969. It went 1330s. And like I said, it was the tow car. And so I used to race my car in class, my Pontiacs. And after I won class, then they'd have eliminations in the afternoon when all the classes raced each other and was handicapped. And I said, you know, when you could break out. And I said, I don't want to do that, waste my race car on that. So I used to have one of my buddies drive the Cougar for class eliminator during the day when I was racing the race car. And he'd always win because there was nobody in that class that could run 1330s. They was racing 15-second cars. So he'd always win. So then after, if I win class, would park my Pontiac, I'd get in the Cougar, and we're out there, you know, why not? Make some more laps. So then we would start, you know, the bracket, and I would just keep going and going until I got beat. And then I didn't care. Then I come back and we tow my Pontiac home. But, you know, but that was my whole experience with Fords. Wow. It was a cool car, and I wrecked it. So may it rest in peace. But that's a story for another day.
So you did the Cleveland box yourself. You picked out what Clevelands you're going to race for your Mustang.
I already was pretty friendly with Glidden and Jack Roush, a little bit with Dino, because we were we raced against each other. I was virtually no threat to them. You know, but we raced. We traveled around the country. And you know, in those years, you couldn't keep your car at the track. You know, you weren't allowed to keep your car at the track. Every race car had to physically leave the premises, and everybody went back to the hotels. And you worked on your race cars at the hotels. And it was like this giant car show. I mean, I used to love with the Ford. There was a lot of work to do on the Fords overnight. You know, head gaskets. You know, they were only good for like 4 runs. There was a lot more work on the Ford than there was on the Vegas. So always outside working. I remember having seen Don Garlitz working on his Top Fuel car just a couple of stalls over from me, and the Super Stockers, and so many famous guys that became really famous later that worked in this parking lot. And we didn't have big trailers and trucks, you know. But by then I had good rigs. I had a Chaparral. That was my once I had my dually and a Chaparral, but there was no generators in the trailers. And I had this big reel, this big wooden reel. It was a wire, you know, that's what the electric companies would use that to do for wiring. And I bought like, I think it was 400 or 500 feet of just regular extension cord. And I made ends. And I had this little device, which I still have to this day in my drawer, where you thread it into a light bulb socket, and it had an AC 110 plug, and then you plug your extension cord into it. So we always went to Holiday Inns, and Holiday Inns had that big round sign with all the bulbs. So I always tried to park pretty close to that and I would unscrew one of the bulbs, plug this in. I'd lay down this long, it was an extension cord. It was hundreds of feet long, and a little duct tape so people wouldn't trip over it. And I plugged it in, and I had these lights on the side of my trailer. I was like, God, I had everything.
Dang it, man.
You know, I had electric, 110 impact, I had electricity.
Right.
And
right.
it was a great thing. And we could work all night, and that was it. So, it was just a different deal. So, and used to hang out. And if you didn't break anything, or Friday night or Saturday, you'd hang out. The Holiday Inn would have a little bar with a little band would come over, and you were with these guys. So you got to be friends with them. And it wasn't the intensity like the Pro Stock these last, 20 years, 15 years.
15,
it's so intense. These people are not friends. They might respect each other, but they're not friends.
Right.
They're real. It was a different thing. In our day, we hung out. We match raced together. We made money. Doing stuff together. So when I went to the Ford, I went to Jack and I told Jack, hey, I'm going to build a Ford. I'm going to race next year. I had Don Hardy building me a car.
Yeah.
And I ordered some blocks, and I had ordered every piece. I didn't have another bolt that fit a Ford in my shop. And I told Jack, listen, I just want a couple of sets of heads, just, good stuff. I'm not asking for your best. I know you're not selling that. I said, I just want a good starting point. I downplayed it. I just want good baseline stuff that you use, because he sold a lot of motors complete. I said, I just want those kind of heads. He said, well, I'll sell your motor. I said, no, that's all right. I built my own motor. I just need the heads. So I'd buy the heads from him. But then I applied all the stuff that we learned with our Chevrolets. And I knew the Ford guys just weren't into that, with the real low tension rings, the wall finishes that we use, which now we know was probably wrong, but that's what we did back then. And I applied all that specialty that we did with the short block, and even with the race cars with frictional losses. It was the Ford guys, it was just power. They had these heads. It was, big power. So I built all these. And before I went out to Pomona, so, Pomona was always, I guess, the end of January. And I picked up the car in November. And back then, when you bought a car, it wasn't like going to McCamus or Jerry Haas or Bickle. And, you go from their shop to the racetrack. That car was done, painted, wired, plumbed, set, bars. You literally went to the racetrack. You'd let the clutch up. We picked these things up. They weren't painted. They were rough. And they had to go to the body shop. And then when you got it back from the body shop, you had to wire it. You had to put fuel system in it. All you got from Hardy is you got the hood scoop was kind of finished, and you got a set of headers. And he had a mock-up engine there. Yeah. And he built a lot of Fords, for Glidden and Roush and Nicholson. So he had all the makings of that. And so between November and January, you had to do all this, get it painted, wired, plumbed, built the motors. We didn't have engine dynos. We didn't even have fire-up stands. Just built these motors. I built them the way I built the Chevys. And we put all these motors together. And back then, Paul Kaufman was my crew guy, and he worked with me and together. We almost like lived together. We were just together. And we finished these two motors, and we're going to put one in the car and start it up. So I went on. I says, Paul, what's the firing order on a Ford? He goes, I don't know. I said, well, I don't know either. So we ran down to the auto parts store, and they had that little rack with the Chilton's manuals and all the little books. So I didn't want to buy it. It was $5. I said, so I opened up the Chilton's manual, and I looked up the Ford, and I saw the firing order. I remember I took a pen and I wrote it in my hand. I just wrote the firing order in my hand. So put the book back on the shelf and left. And then came back to the shop. I said, okay, let's make up a set of wires. You had to make your wires, put ends on them at that, everything was. And put the wire set on, made them up, hit the key, fired it up, boom, it started, ran. It was good. We warmed it up, ran the valves, leaked it, and everything was good. Time to go. Load it up, put them in the trailer, and head out and drive cross country to California.
Damn.
And that's how we started. And we tested, went out to Irwindale. Irwindale, the original Irwindale racetrack, was always open for testing. It was $5.
Wow.
$5 a day. And the guy that owned it, you could test by yourself or whoever came, was $5. And he would open up the gate and he'd show you in the tower when you want to make it. Then you didn't even have the remote switch. Well, you had the remote to start it, but to reset the clocks, the old Crondex, I don't know if you ever saw them. They actually spun and then stopped. And
Really?
somebody had to handwrite the number. They had to handwrite the number, put it on a piece of paper, and it went through that too. And it went to the return road, and that's where you got your time slip. So there was nobody there. No ambulance. There was nothing there. And somebody had to go up in the tower, read the number on the Crondex, write it down. He had a stack of time slips. He would write it down because all you had was mile an hour and ET.
Yeah.
And he would write it down and then click it and reset the timers. And then for the next run, that on the starting line, they had the button for the starter. There was no starter. It was one of your crew guys would just
push the button,
hit the button, and run the tree down. So we were out there testing, had the 2 motors, and we were there for like 3 days. We kept it, but after 2 days, and the kid was going up in the tower, getting the time slips. And it wasn't a fast track. There was no preparation or anything. And we were barely on national event tracks. We were going 890s, with the Vega at the end. Yeah. And I thought, the Ford would certainly be, at least that fast right off the bat. And the kid kept coming back and he kept going. It was 931, 928, 29, 32. Yeah. We're changing. Let's try the other motor. And he kept coming back and he said it was, again, 20s, 30s. I said, but it was going 150, 151, which was faster. The Vega only went, I think maybe once or twice went 150. It was usually 49, 70, something like that.
Yeah.
So we were like a lot disappointed. We were out there with all that. We're going, what's wrong? We're trying to find out, what we were doing. And then at the end of the day, I went up to the tower. And I said, I want to shut all the lights off. And the kid wasn't around. So I said, I'll go up there and shut everything down. So I go up there and he had just given me the time slip. I think it was like 928 at 150.50. So I'm looking down at the Crondoc and it said 9028.
Wow.
So this kid, he thought the O didn't count.
Right.
So all these runs we were making, we were going 9-0s. We were going 902, 903. And he was telling us going 920. And he wrote it down, in pencil, 920s, 930s. I said, oh, my God. But we knew we had something. And we went out to Pomona. And then the next week was the race at Pomona. And the car went 901. At first, right down the track went 901. And it wasn't a fast weekend. And it was good because the best Fords were only going, they were going low 90s.
Okay.
And they already, they didn't have the Maverick yet. But we were within a tenth. And I had never even had a Ford motor. I had nothing. And we were within a tenth of the fastest car there. And I went to the semis. And actually beat Nicholson. He had a driver. Dondero drove for him back then. So I beat Dondero and Nicholson, and then I got beat.
Nice.
It was I think it was Gap beat me in the semis, but we were happy. We were right there, and we knew nothing about the car.
What were you doing for oiling for? Did you do any oiling issues? Do you remember all that stuff back then?
All we did back then, these were aluminum rod motors.
Okay.
We had Heiner, remember Heiner and Miller? And now his son, I forget which Pro Stock car his son is the crew chief on. Okay. Heiner's kid is on one of the top-notch Pro Stock teams. But Heiner and Miller were friends of mine, and we raced together and against each other in GT. He had GT cars like I did. He had a 69 Camaro. And then he went to Pro Stock a year before I did. And he had like a Wolverine or some kind of home-built Vega. Okay. And I had never driven a car with 2 carburetors. I always had 4 barrels. His GT class was 4 barrels. Right. And I remember Miller got sick. He had his stomach flu or something, and he couldn't drive. So they had to go. So he came over. He said, Scott, can you drive the car? And I said, I could try. It's a Vega. You know, I'm used to a big Camaro, you know, and I get this little tiny little rattle trap, you know, 2,100-pound car with a different kind of linky stick. You know, had a little short stick. I was used to a long stick. I had my 4-speed. These were all manual 4-speed cars.
Oh yeah.
And it had a tunnel rim. Ooh, I never had a tunnel rim. So I remember I touched the gas, and I'm driving this thing down the racetrack, and I drove it, and it was like an eye opener, and it went, it just cracked. It was like 10.0 and 990, something like that back then, and then he felt better the next day, so he raced. So I qualified the car, and then Miller was able to. Nobody cared in those days, you know, who drove it, and
right.
he raced it on Sunday. But so that gave me a little first time I ever stepped on a gas pedal with a tunnel rim car. But like I said, so we went and we just fine-tuned it from there, and we immediately, you know, went mid 890s, went 888.
Yeah.
And all with these standard heads, and I just played with the short blocks. So, you know, telling you a story about the when I started, Bob asked me, you know, where did you get the heads? I said, I bought them from Jack. I said, it's so his stuff that he sells, that's regularly. He said, there's a lot better stuff than that. I said, it's fine. It's okay. I'm just getting my feet wet. And so I said, you know, I'm trying to put a third engine together. I needed like a match race motor. I wanted to have, because back then you did tire testing.
Yep.
And that you made a lot of money tire testing. And I said, I didn't want to race my good motors because back then those blocks, maybe 10, 12 runs and you wind up cracking a cylinder. And so we used to sleeve them, and I'd put either 1 or 2 sleeves in a block, and it would become my backup motor. And Saturday nights, you know, I always had one fresh motor. We always took the guts out of one engine, put it in a new block, kept switching blocks.
Yep.
And boy, let me tell you, there was a difference. Some blocks were just flat faster. And so Glenn said, you know, if you're interested, I got a set of heads here. I said, I built them, I tried them. They were, you know, they're really big runner, big Ford. He said they didn't run very well. I said, but they run, right? They go up and down a racetrack. He said, oh yeah, they'll do that. He said, well, you want them? He said, they're under the bench. They're all covered with dust. I said, yeah, I'll take them. I'll build my tire test engine with that because I don't want to waste my good stuff.
Right.
So he sells it. I think it was $300. Complete springs.
Yep.
You know, we didn't have, back then we had TRW titanium intakes, 290s, and you had Ford sodium filled exhaust steels. And that's what we had. And we always ran stock. So he gives me these heads, and they sat under my shelf. And for the Summer Nationals at Englishtown, my home track, I decided I'm going to try these. So part of my engine thoughts back then is you couldn't change too many things, but I was a big believer in small, medium, large. So you get so interested in, I had my small heads, I had a medium sized head, and a big set of heads, and I had 2 manifolds. I had one with, you know, we straightened the runners at a much bigger volume, and one that was pretty standard and was smaller. And then I had 2 cams. We tested a lot of cams, but in my racing trim, I had my Good Air cam. Yep. And I had my hot weather cam. So if you think about it, you had intake runner size. It was all the same cubic inch. Mm-hmm. Intake runner size, manifold size, camshaft size. Mix and match those 3 components. Come up with the magic sauce. So it was during the summer, it was hot, so I had my short cam in it, my summer cam, but I put those big heads on it with my small manifold. Okay. And God damn, this thing set high mile an hour at Englishtown at the Summer Nationals. It's stunning, right? And ET, I was within one or 2 hundredths, but it was because of the weight break. This thing was flying. And so Glidden came by. And, you know, they were all my buddy until all of a sudden I was right. And he says, what heads are those? I said, Bob, those are the ones you sold me. He says, no. I said, Bob, he says, what'd you do to them? Said, nothing. Just the way you gave it to me. Even the springs they were wrong. That's what He says, can't be. I said,
Hey.
okay, that's what it was. So, and then at the same race, Jack Roush comes by. There's all this, if you're 5, 6, 700s behind a guy, they don't care.
Right.
But when you're 1 or 200s, and and they're professional Ford racers. I was a kid. I'm 23 years old. And these guys were Ford engineers, and Glidden was in a world of his own. What he did and played with, and I was playing more in the short blocks. And I didn't do the cylinder heads. I never was the cylinder head guy.
Yep.
Which is unfortunately where all the power is.
Yep.
But and again, no dyno. Never had a dyno. Never had a Ford engine on a dyno. So Roush comes by. And he said, "That's a pretty good run you made." I said, "Yeah, thanks. Yeah, it's coming around." I said, "It's neat." He said, are those my heads?" I said, "No, that's a set of heads I got from Bob." So really? Oh, yeah. I said, "They're better than mine?" I said, "I can't tell. I tried different mouth." I said, "They run about the same, but it's obviously this package is running pretty good. It ran speed like crazy." And he said, "So Scott," he says, "I got to ask you a question." He said, "And you don't have to answer if you don't want to, but I got to ask you a question." He said, "What crankshaft do you have in there?" I said, "Stock Ford crank." The cranks were cast.
Right.
They were just $50 cranks, cast cranks. And we had them machined.
Offset down or something.
Well, we kept the stock stroke, but we widened the throws, put Chevrolet rods on them, Chevrolet 2-inch journal size. But other than that, it was a cast crank, and then we send them out to get chromed. So, and you never spun a crank in your life as smooth as a chrome-plated crankshaft. Just smooth as silk. I used to count, you could hit the counter with your finger, and how many turns would the crank go by itself when you put them over? It was amazing how smooth they were. And he said, so Jack's saying, "You sure that's just the stock cranks?" He said, "Stock firing water?" I says, "Yeah, why?" And he looks because I had on the firewall, because I'm a Chevrolet guy, 1843657
Right.
That's the number. And the Ford's the banks at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
Yeah.
So I just renamed them 1357 through 468. So when I did my valves, I'm still doing my firing, but I had the firing order because it was different than Chevrolet. I just transposed the numbers. I renamed the cylinders. Instead of 1, 2, 3, 4, it was 1, 3, 5, 7. And I had on the firing order on these little, those stickums, you punch them out and they stick on the plastic. So I had them right on the firewall. So because I couldn't remember it. And that was the firing. So all these guys, the Ford guys, they saw those numbers and they knew what. A lot of people did that. The firing order was on the firewall, and it was just. And I told him, I said, "No, I just labeled my cylinders like a Chevrolet." And then Jack looks at me, just shakes his head, and just walks away. And that was it. But it was a fun time. And match racing that car, it was a killer. Nobody could touch that thing. When 850s.
Damn,
158. This is 1975.
Yeah.
We had a circuit. I'd run my car on the circuit, and Jenkins and Hill, they'd all have their big inch motors. Jenkins had that thing with the giant wing and that big snorkel scoop, with a big block in it. The Hemi guys had big inch. They were racing. Legally they were mostly running 393s and 404. Hemis, D-stroke stuff, but they had 440s and bigger match race motors, and that's what all the Hemi guys. And they could all go 870s, 860s, and I was going 850s, and I had it was like a 360. So, I could just run that motor and take a little weight out. I had 300 pounds of lead in it.
Well, what engine was it? It was a Cleveland.
It was a Cleveland. It just had a 3750 crank in it.
Okay.
And I had Bob's heads on it because they were the biggest heads. And I never, and that's what I used for match racing. And when I did tire testing, I didn't use the big motor. I used a regular motor, but just put whatever heads I'd use my bad blocks. We'd put a bunch of sleeves on them, and I'd use that for tire testing. And then I'd always have fresh blocks for national events. There was only 8 national events. So it wasn't that hard to keep, fresh pieces. Head gaskets. You didn't have Cometic gaskets. You had 10 bolts, and they weren't even high performance Velcro. They were just stock gaskets. And 4 runs. The 5th run, it was leaking. So if you made 2 qualifiers on Friday, 2 on Saturday, you had to pull the head Saturday night. Wow. And I used to pull the heads and would pull the pan down, look at it, and just kick the piston up a little bit. And because I had some really back cut 043 rings in the top, you could put them on with your finger. And we just kick the piston up, and I'd throw a fresh ring on it. And it was kind of like a pre-day plasma. It was a moly ring. It wasn't a steel ring. And they would seal instantly. If the cylinder walls had moly in them, when the cylinder walls were black, it was perfect. Yep. And I'd flip a top ring in it with my fingers and just hold. You didn't even need a sleeve. Just kind of hold them. They were so low tension, and just pop the piston down. So we'd do a top ring and a set of head gaskets for race day.
Wow.
And that was the procedure. And we were good to go. But it was quite a time. But
do you remember any work on those heads, those Glidden heads? Do you remember any of the ports or any configurations or anything like that? Do you remember any of that?
He just widened them. None of the heads I ever had the filled floors. It was always that torque, but we never filled the floors on the heads.
Yep.
There's always more than one way to skin a cat. You could talk about the head's too big. Well, change the cam. You can fool a lot of things. The heads in the intake is a package.
Right.
So you could do a lot with the intake manifold, and all that talk about making. Those guys, when they went into the long wheelbase cars, they were using smaller cubic inches because it was a much lighter weight brake. So they would all build 340s and 338, D-stroke stuff.
Yeah.
And on a D-stroke motor, I can see where the runner was just really way too big. But on 354s, which is what I always ran,
yep,
it was fine. It just, as long as you had the right combination of manifold and camshaft. But again, just raced those years, and I kind of retired right at the end of the '76 season. I mean, the handwriting was on the wall. In the old days, it was like homemade cars, and then pick up a Don Hardy car was like $8,000 or $9,000, $10,000, and
yep.
Even the SRD cars, they were a little more expensive, but they were 12 or 13. But you could sell them. You could survive on mattress. You could kind of make a living. We didn't have fancy tow equipment, but the purses never changed. There was nothing. And if it wasn't for match racing, you couldn't even think about doing it. So I decided, and again, seeing all these guys that had great businesses and had some money, and then they could come back, and they were older. We were in our 20s or early 30s, and they were like 45. They were racing, having a great time, and they were just playing around.
Right.
And I said, you know what, it's a wonderful, I love the sport, but this is no way to make a living. And I said, I'm going to start working in the industry. And I was already, back then, we sold, every time, you build all these motors constantly, I was always selling them. I had 3 or 4 guys that I supplied them with engines. They either ran in a local Pro Stock or they ran in some kind of class eliminations. And so it was a good source of income, selling off the used engines. And I went to work for Dick Maskin. I made a deal with him before the season ended, and I told him I wanted to work with him because I lived in Queens, and he was over in Stamford, Connecticut. It was only like 35 minutes drive from my house. And that's when I sold all that stuff, and I was out of the Pro Stock business. But I kept building engines. I built engines at night, did them out of my house. Had rented a shop, $100 a month. I rented a shop in S&K Speed in one room. I mean, it was a crazy time. And then when Dick moved the factory all the way up in Connecticut, and I couldn't commute anymore because it was way too far.
Yeah.
And I said to myself, I love working with Dick. I learned a lot about businesses. Dick was a brilliant guy, and he taught me a lot. And we worked great together. But I went up to that area in Connecticut, and I'm a big city boy.
Right.
And I said, no, I can't do that. And it was funny. because you know, every guy, you got your sock drawer, you know, your top drawer, your sock drawer, and your under, and all the checks. And Dick paid me very well in those days, and it was great, great. I opened up my sock drawer, and there's all these checks, and I never cashed them because I made 5 times that amount of money just working at night, building motors.
Wow.
So I said, you know what? The future is, even though I love doing that job, I said, I'm not going to move upstate because then I'd lose my basis. I couldn't build the motors. I said, and I told Dick, I can't do it. And someday, well, I'll tell you, there's a million stories about what I did at Moroso. But, and then I just stayed in New York, kept building motors, and I got started with the nitrous. And that's what gave me, you know, the whole another generation of people. Because when I was out in California.
So let me tell you, so you were talking about Dick Moroso, not Mask.
No, Dick Moroso.
Okay, because you said Mask before, and I started getting, I'm thinking Connecticut.
No. Well, Connecticut, Dick Moroso.
Got it.
Stanford.
Okay.
Stanford.
Yeah. Nope, I'm on the same page now.
Yeah.
All right.
So that's when I started. It was like a whole nother career. Started with nitrous in its infancy.
So that's what, mid-70s? Because mid-70s?
I actually started playing with nitrous in 75.
Okay.
And I had some friends of mine, Eddie, we called him Eddie Eyes. He turned out working for me years later, and his brother Freddie was since passed. But they had a 67 Camaro, and I built them first a 482 big block, just a 125 oval 4-inch stroke, just a regular big block. And I had some nitrous stuff that I'd picked up in California. And you remember Dale Armstrong?
Yep.
With the alcoholic?
Yep.
So Dale was a friend of mine. We actually had the same girlfriend at different times, but that's another story.
Whoa, where did he go?
I'm back. So he introduced me to a guy, 10,000 RPM, I think it was, and he showed me this plate. And there was all kinds of rumors about nitrous, that Leo had it and a couple people had it. And I didn't know anything about it. And he shows me this plate. And I said, you know what? I got some guys back home, street racers. We'll play around with it. And that's before I met my friends at NOS. And I just had this one plate. And I modified the plate and re-drilled it in it. And I really got into the nitrous. And just that brought a whole nother world of business. And, and then went in with Top Sportsman Racing and then Pro Mod Racing. And it was all based on, really having a handle of the nitrous. And back in, when we first started, literally half the field, I'd get the qualifying sheet. Half the field, I built their engines. And half the field. And then, Gene was very good and very smart. And Sonny was also very smart. He was good. Nitrous wasn't his forte, though. And then it just, and then I stopped doing it. It just wasn't a great business. People were over their heads a lot, and they make a simple mistake and just wreck stuff. You know what? No matter how much money somebody had, after a while, you were just angry, you'd burn stuff up. And I prided myself. If you didn't touch them, you didn't play with them, we literally used to get 40 to 50 runs. And I had a deal that I'd bring the motors back, and I had, 6 or 8 teams that each had 2 or 3 motors, and I'd maintain them all. And for at least 40 runs, and to put rods in them, probably pistons and hold them in rings, and they were ready to go. And if they didn't screw with the tune-up, it would last. And I go to all the national events. I lived on the road, and went from trailer to trailer, and we kept doing stuff. So, but it was exciting. It was great. It was fun. It was a terrible business because you couldn't do anything else. Monday morning, it'd be your parking lots filled with these with trailers, and everybody had the motor, and you had to fix everything, and everything had to leave by Thursday. It was just craziness. And so you couldn't do your regular business. We used to do a lot of boat stuff back then too.
All right. And
just couldn't do it. So then I, went a different direction in my engine business, and it turned out pretty good for me. So I'm happy to do it. But I mean, this was a whole history, that young kids today can't even understand the camaraderie. We were friends. We'd go out drinking, we'd hang out, the stuff, some of which you can't even talk about. what was going on. And I'm a kid. I was never a drinker.
Yeah.
And some of these guys could drink. And
Really?
I'm telling you, they would, at match races, not at national events, but at match races, they would pour these guys into the car. I mean, they were falling down drunk, match racing. And it was fun. You know, crowds.
I mean, like Jenkins, they all party together. Jenkins, Dino, they all drank together.
Not together. They had their own little routines, and I'd see it. But and it was quite a deal. And the fans and the girls and the this and that, you can't even imagine. It was a great time. You know, you would have starved for a day. You come there, everybody came to see you. And that was it. You get home, you go match race to match race. And like I said, there was only 8 national events, so you had plenty of time. There was local circuits. Plus we ran, in those days, we ran points races. Pro Stock ran points. So we were divisional, like I was always 1 or 2 in division. Division 1 was a tough Pro Stock deal back then. You had Jenkins, you know, Zool was real good. Darrell, you know, Jenkins had 2 cars. There was a lot of good cars in Division 1, so it really meant something. And it again, different time. And all this time, like I said, no engine dynos, no computers, no 2-step. I never drove a Pro Stock car with a 2-step. It had a gas pedal, had a click. You know, when we went to Lenko's, Chrysler had them first. Yep. And then a few other people switched them. The Fords had them, but I still had my small block Chevy. And Vinny Tarantolo, who involved Vitar Transmissions, was a good friend, and he was good friends with Ralph Truppi. And I decided, you know what, we're gonna try one of these things. So I ordered a Lenko, and I remember I went to the airport, I didn't have UPS back then. Right. When you ordered parts from California, I had to drive to the airport, and they had a counter. You know, there was a place where air freight came in. Yep. So I'd always go at like 11 or midnight, so there'd be no traffic, and you go in and you pick up your stuff that air freighted. And I remember bringing it back, brought it to Ralph's place, and Vinny was there from the training. And we took newspaper, we took big sections of newspaper, and we didn't know what was inside. So of course, brand new transmission, we just take it apart. That's what you do. And we had all these sections of newspaper, and we put each section on a separate, so we didn't mess anything up. We knew where everything came from. Right. And we take the whole thing. And I remember Vinny's looking at it, and he's going, you know, this is a turbo 400 clutch. This is from this. The early Lenkos had automatic transmission parts in them, you know, in the planetary. So it was like crazy. So we got the thing just before Indy. And I went out to Indy, and you had just 4 qualifying runs. Yep. 2 and 2. So we used the same bell housing because I even had my Lenko made with the GM input shaft. So it would be simple. It had the GM, housing, and it bolted right into my bell housing. Yep. So you could change transmissions, or the drive shaft was different, but you could and we didn't have drive shaft loops or anything. Why would you need a drive shaft? Right. You know, so we just changed drive shaft. So I would make a run on the first, let's say the first run would be with the 4-speed manual. Yep. And then the second run would be with the Lenko. And then the next day I would switch because one was more day and one was later at night. We didn't race at night. You didn't race at night, but it was cooler, you know. So to be fair, so I did 4-speed Lenko, and then the next day I did Lenko 4-speed. And the 4-speed was faster. It was a couple 300s quicker, but a mile and an hour faster. So Lenko had a lot of track. Wow. And we had small motors, you know, we had 327s. These things, you know, in the Chevy, and if they made 650 on their, I doubt they ever, you know, I don't know, we never dynoed them, but they probably made 600 something, 620, whatever. And it just wasn't, the Lenko slowed the cars down. But, you know, and I considered myself a formidable 4-speed guy, and it was faster with the 4-speed. But once we got with the better heads and we got the cars going, you know, back then we were going like 19s during the summer. and 908, 910, 912, and it was physically faster with the 4-speeds, less drag, if you knew how to drive. And with the Fords, they had so much more power. Only had Lenkos in them by then. But that was the transition point. Somewhere around 90 was where the Lenko took off. But the Lenko made a lot of guys drivers. There was a bunch of guys that they weren't so good with a 4-speed driver. You know, they knew how to race. They knew how to do a lot of things.
Yep.
They just weren't the best behind the wheel, and it made them drivers. You know, there was only a few guys that were natural 4-speed guys. But that's kind of it. So anyway, so if you got any kind of questions, you will. Here's
what we'll do. They've been kind of piling up, so I'll start going. Well, that's all right. Right now, there's 114 people that have been on here.
Really?
Oh yeah.
Wow, that's cool.
Yeah, it is.
That's cool.
So, and it's worldwide. People can watch this in a replay. It's on my channels for.
It's on YouTube, right? They can watch it. It'll always be on YouTube.
There it is, perpetual. Cool. So Carly Wolf, thank you for sending in $5. Thank you again. It says, thank you for supporting the Keisters Mid-Atlantic.
Tim, do we split that? The $5? No. Okay.
We do. We do.
All right.
I'll tell you the truth. A lot of times people will donate money through a live chat, which is what someone did here. And with a guest, if I was getting some money that was substantial, I always offer to split it with a guest. Otherwise it goes right back in the kitty to build these engines behind me to keep this channel going.
Keep the Cleveland alive.
That's it. We got to keep them going.
Okay.
Let's see. Lot Burns. Damn, I was still in the Army in 1971. We would wait in line to use the phone. Yeah. When you talked about the payphone.
That's it.
You know? I remember it was a dime back then, and then it went up to a quarter, I think.
Now, he's not from California, is he? Was he at
I don't know.
Fremont?
I don't know. Put the word in there, Lot, if you're from Fremont. Let's see. George Drees. Am I remembering you around Armonk, New York on some select evenings back in the day? Armonk, New York.
Westchester. Yeah. That was, I wasn't from there, but.
You raced around there, though, maybe, right?
There was, in my memory, it's funny, you get older. I don't know if you see it yet. Pulling names out is hard, and the guy's a great guy, still around. Bob Ingalls. I think Bob Ingalls was from there.
Okay.
And I think that's where his shop was. You might say, might have been confusing me with him. But Bob had a shop in Armonk.
Todd Mack, my favorite street racer. He's talking about you, Scott.
Oh, Todd's watching?
Yep, Todd Mack.
Oh, God. How are you doing, Todd?
There he is.
Oh, boy. Those were the days, right, Todd? That was fun. It's been great. I'm still doing it. Now that Chris is restoring my old Mustang, that's a whole story in itself. We haven't even touched on that.
I know. It's like we could talk for hours.
We'll do it again. But
we will.
That car is so original. It's unbelievable. And the work that Chris did to it, spectacular. I don't think it ever looked as good. And this guy's a craftsman and just dedicated. And it's going to be fun. I hope we get a chance to want to run it again. We're going to put a motor together. I'd love to run it in, NHRA has the nostalgia drags. I think they have it in Maple Grove and have it in Indy. And I'd love to do that at least once, race it at Indy again.
I'll tell you a quick story. There's a guy that has a Mustang II, 76, I think it is, Mustang II Pro Stock car. Been sitting since the back in the day. Fires it up every once in a while. I got to go this spring to go see it. I already made a little video on it.
Whose car was it?
I can't remember the guy's name now.
Was it an Audi car?
I don't even know, Scott. Okay. I got pictures of it. I can send it to you.
There were a lot of 75 and 76, Mustang IIs back then.
Beautiful car, all original. Yeah. I mean, the things, he's got all the receipts from everything from when he bought the car. I think it's Wolverine. I'll show you the picture.
Okay.
Johnny GTO. He built my Pontiac 400 Ram Air 3 in the mid 80s at his Long Island shop. Didn't know much about him then, just that he was knowledgeable and experienced with Pontiacs. I learned about him quickly shortly thereafter. So there's another message to you.
Yeah, we built a few in our day. We built a few. But,
at that time, he was competing in Top Sportsman and was about to break the 200-mile-an-hour mark when Bill Coleman beat him to it.
Yeah, he did. He did. But then we got to the sixes first, so that made up for it.
All right. Trev, hi, Tim. Made it awesome. Thank you for being here.
That's cool. Glad to do it. It, you know, this was my whole life. This is, you know, what we always did. And the fun part, it's 50 some odd years later, still doing it. Still go to work every day, learn something new all the time.
You still find it challenging?
Oh God, yes, absolutely. And I love telling, even to all the guys that work for me, you know, a lot of them younger.
Yeah.
And just the stories of the old days and how different it was. But all the basic stuff that we learned still applies today. How we test, now we have better equipment, we can test, we can learn, we can see, you know, we can really progress. But it's, those were the basics that were taught that stay with you forever. Never forget them. So it's great. And I love the new business building these unbelievably powerful street engines. You know, 1,200, 14, 1,500, just crazy, stupid stuff. And people put them in stock cars. I can't wait for the phone call. Oh my God, you know, they brag about it.
My car in half. Frames bent now, you know, putting your engine in there.
The supercharged is just incredible. We're not big on turbos. We don't really do any turbo stuff. But the supercharged stuff, what a blast that is. It's just fun. Oh, it's fun. It's crazy. So when the customers love that stuff, I mean, it's just huge, big power and drivable. That's what makes them, that's what's cool about it. You know, you can swap a pulley and drive these things around.
Yeah.
And, you know, you don't need a lot of camshaft and, you know, to make big pass. So it's really a perfect combination. And now with, you know, E85, you know, it was, you know, crazy. Everybody had to run all these big intercoolers, see all the turbo, these giant, ugly intercoolers.
Yeah.
But on a street car with E85, you don't need the intercoolers. And it's just, stupid power. And it's fun. You still go to a gas station, fill it up with some cheap E85. Of course, you don't go too far, but yeah, you have a good time. And just driving these, I've been in these cars, and it's just wild. You know, you got to be really careful. They're your best customers. It's because you can't really jump on them. They're just so fast to scare you to death. So you never beat it. It's like how it used to be. We used to do a lot of marine engine stuff in the 80s. Mercury Marine didn't have any real good high powered stuff back then. So a lot of people did, you know, high power back then. High power was 600-700 horsepower.
Yeah.
And marine engines. And your best customers were the guys that had big boats. I mean, I'm sorry, it was the opposite. Your best customer, the guy that had a small boat, you know, 25, 27 footer, and it put a 650 horsepower engine in it, and, you know, go 80. But in those little boats, you couldn't stay on it. You'd kill yourself. So that, you know, so they couldn't really abuse the engine. You sell the same engine to a guy, put two of them in a 42 footer or 46 footer or something like that. And they would kill the engines because they could ride them wide open all day.
Right.
And these engines weren't built, you know, they're not meant for that. You know, a boat engine is like it's like driving a truck in high gear, pulling up a mountain all day long.
All the time.
That's all the time. That's the load on them. So, you know, it was very hard to just take, you know, the kind of engines that we were building, race engines or even performance street. You know, marine is that's a whole nother world, you know, and Mercury really has a handle on it now. There's no room for aftermarket because the Mercury stuff is just so good. Except my friend John Kaza, he's found a new source of income. He applies that old school knowledge, and he makes these Mercury guys look a little silly. I mean, he can tickle these things, and, you know, hundreds of horsepower better than what Mercury does. So it just shows, you know, Mercury did the engineering and the design and the components. You couldn't do that as an individual. But then you take a smart guy like John, and he just tickles them and he plays with them, and man, make them look silly. And so it's, God bless, it's a great business for him. He likes playing with that.
That's
so
what he told me.
Old school knowledge still works, still counts. You know, and if you can combine it with modern technology, now you got something. You know, guys like Greg, you know, have been, you know, a lot of the old pro side, you know, the Mopar guys, they just, they've had this background, the same like I had, and then they applied it with new technology, and boom, you got something. So it's still thrilling. It's fun. It's exciting to be out there.
Even after all these years, man, that's what I like to hear.
Yep.
I'm the same way, although I don't nothing to your level, but that's why I'm doing this. I mean, I still love drag racing. I still love building engines. Still love all that stuff. Because guys aren't doing it like they used to. It's just a dying art, I think.
No, we're still doing it. You know, Vinny Badano, you know, we race together. We have the car at the shop. We haven't had much time the last few years. We're just kind of inundated. And so we haven't raced, but, you know, back, you know, 6, 7, 10 years, you know, we used to follow the circuit, really, won 3 or 4 world championships together. And you know, it was great. It was old school and new school. You put it all together and you had a winning combination. And, you know, but now it's just crazy, out of control. You just, and, you know, I hate it. I hate when people say, oh, if you have money, you can win, because that was never true. Okay. Never was true. But now, damn, you need a certain amount of money. This stuff is just so expensive. And to run at the top, you got to run it on the edge. And it's, man, I can't sense it. That's just beating your head against the wall. And you're gonna just eat up money. So it makes it harder. But the trick there is to learn you could back off a smidge and the thing could still be very reliable. But when you're going to that edge, I look at Fast Stevie, you know Stevie Fast, you know, just won that race. You know, they blew up a bunch of money. You know, you run them hard, that's what happens in these motors. That's it. You sacrifice them. It's like, you know, top fuel. But yet there are guys that are really good in top fuel, don't hurt a lot of stuff. You know, Mike Ashley came by my shop, and he was talking about how his guys are so conservative, how they only use a fraction of the motors do they ever really hurt, by comparison to some teams where they just throw it at it, you know, willy-nilly, and just hope it makes it to the end. But, you know, so yeah, it's still, again, it's all, you know, the old timers know, and it's good. So what else you got for me there,
Let's see. Well, Daniel Wilson just threw $9.99 and said, thanks, Scott and DragBoss. Thanks, Daniel Wilson.
See, now we can have dessert. That's good.
There it is. We will. How about this? Terry Goforth. Loved all the Pintos and Mustang II Pro Stocks, but yours looked the best in my opinion, Scott.
Thank you.
There you go.
I love that car, and I still do. And I look at the pictures of it now. I mean, it's deja vu all over again. I mean, red was always kind of my color.
Okay.
My Camaros, the GT, you know, all my cars were red. So it looks good. But that car was pretty. That body style just it had those natural lines, and it just always worked well. So
Match Racing filled the grandstands to watch and place wagers on the Pro Stock and Super Stockers. It didn't have to run according to the published rules and safety inspections. Anything goes.
Yeah, like, you know, after the Summer Nationals every year in Tahoe, down south a little bit, MIR, they always had the Pro Stock race. It was like the Tuesday night after the Summers, and the rules were wide open. You know, nobody checked anything. They said they did, nobody did. And, you know, I always ran really good there. And there was a couple boys had some slightly enlarged engines. You could tell, because at Englishtown they could barely qualify, and they'd go down there and they were flying. So again, guess what happened? But you know, but we did that, and those kind of tracks were fun.
What were you making?
Man, like
how much were you making? Match Racing, how much would you make?
Oh, money wise?
Yeah.
No, you would get we'd get either 900 or 1,200, depending on how far we had to drive. You know, it depended on distance. We'd get some money, you know, for gas money, and but it was never 500. It was usually 300 a pass, and you make 3 runs, it was $900. You know, we'd be guaranteed to rain. You know, you used to have a guarantee, or else you would never leave home. Right. You know, they wanted you to leave even if the forecasts were showers. You know, we didn't have great weather forecasting then, and you're driving a day to get there. You had to leave. You know, so everybody worked it out. You know, when it rains, everybody loses, and that was part of the game. You know, the track owner took the biggest hit, but most of them were fair, and they knew you were there and you came to, you know. So Just like they had to pay their help to come and open the place up, they had to pay their match race guys. But we didn't demand full pay. We knew he got killed, for that race. We couldn't lose money. We just had to go home with something.
Yep.
And everybody worked together. So it was a great time.
Michael Thompson says, "Hi Scott, I saw you at Empire Dragway in New York in '75 and '76. You were the fastest unblown door slammer on the property. I'll never forget it."
That track is great now. That track's really, oh boy, that's a good track. I ran into some top sportsman stuff too at Empire.
It's like Leicester, New York, isn't it?
Yes.
Leicester.
Yeah, it's a great track now. Okay.
Larry Lombardi figured in on the 292 turbo heads.
Oh, Larry's there?
No, he said that Larry must have had a set of those heads, maybe. Thinking Larry Lombardo figured in on the 292 turbo heads.
Larry and I, we raced, we matched, we had a great time together.
We need to get him on here.
We got stories we can't talk about.
I know, but we'll get him on.
And of course, women were involved. But oh boy, it's good to be young.
We'll keep going down through the list. Thanks, DBG Tim, for your lives. I'm really getting nostalgic for the good old days. That's right.
These are the good old days. Don't forget that.
That's a fact.
As long as you're on the right side of the grass, you might as well have a damn good time.
Damn straight on that one.
That's
damn
it.
Straight. Let's see. This guy says, Robert Hill just got in, stuck at work. Well, you can watch it later when you're not at work. It'll be on there for you to see. Now, let's see. Roland Tamacchio. I think the Ford gasket was a McCord. By the way, did you ever get an Australian block?
Never.
There it is.
Never got one. You know something I was going to ask, and I was going to ask Kazi, but all those years that we raced these and we cracked cylinder walls, they were so thin that we never thought about running like hard block. And I don't know if anybody do hard block in the
I've been filling my blocks for 25 years.
Well, I'm talking 50 years ago we didn't film.
Yeah. Well,
but I always thought that might be a nice thing to. I only ran them 5 over. I never even ran them 10 or 20 over. I ran all those motors. They were all 5 over, 4-inch, 05.
I ran them 40 over. Hard block them and go.
Yeah, with real compression and everything, and they live.
Oh yeah, I mean that one in the car over here is making 775 out of 409 cubic inches, stock block. So, how long will it last? I don't know. It'll last a couple of years. Yeah,
well, we were lucky we got 10 runs out of them. So a couple of years.
I'll be happy with a couple of years. Let's see who else do we have here. So Bill said, right, some guys, including ourselves, use Moldex cranks and McCord 6850 head gaskets. So,
I'm trying to remember which gasket. There was only one head gasket available. I don't remember if it was Ford or where we got them from. I think I remember them. They were red, but they didn't have stainless, fire ring. They were just probably wasn't just a McCord, just an OEM gasket. That's before Felpro came out with a HP line, which was really changed things. So,
how big were the cams were you running? Do you remember what that thing had? That Cleveland?
It's funny. I remember the lifts because I had this one lobe that I loved in my Vegas.
Yep.
And it was a Hemi lobe. It was a 500 lobe, and the Hemis used them, and I used them, and nobody else. And when I was really going fast with the Chevy, and a lot of people knew it because the cam guys spread the word around a lot. So many people tried it, but it just didn't work. But again, it was always that combination, the manifold size. For me, it worked. A lot of people thought, people thought there's a magic cam. That, you buy this cam, you're going to go fast.
Exactly.
And it's all just a part of the puzzle. And you got to have the combination. And for me, it just worked. And nobody else that ever got that cam with that. It was actually a Hemi lobe. It was developed for Chrysler, and I ran it, and it just worked for me. And we only ran a 1:5 ratio. The opposite of what you do today. but it just worked. But it wasn't the cam. It was the combination. It was just a package. And I don't remember the duration. I really don't. I don't even think I have any notes back then, what they were. I'll try to
Gotta
find
be in
out.
the 280 range or something like that.
Yeah, I'm sure it was. You know, it was 270, 280, and
Yep.
you know, we turned them. You know, when I had my cars, I was very superstitious, and I had my oil pressure and water temperature gauges. Remember, there was a little chrome box you put under the dash, and you had your water temperature and oil
Yeah, I know what
pressure.
you're talking about. Yeah.
Right, and I had my Moroso tack. The first one I had, Dick gave me, and it was the small tack. It only went to, it didn't even say 10. It went to 9, and it didn't say 10. It just had the numbers after 9. And that was, so when I sold my cars, when I sold my GT Camaro, I took the tack and the 2 gauges out, and I bought a new tack and new gauges and put it in the car and sold it. And I kept the tack and the gauges, and I put it in the Vega.
Okay.
And when I sold the Vega, I took them out of the Vega and I put them in the Mustang. I had, you know, little superstitious stuff I did.
Yep, I get
it. So I had this one Moroso tack. It was one, and in those days, it was a Jones Monroe. The tack was made in Stamford, Connecticut, and that's what Dick Moroso, because he was from Stamford. So that was just a mechanical tack that was using machinery, and it was just a cable-driven tack.
Yeah.
So when we used to leave, like I said, we had no 2-steps, and you know, with the Fords, when I ran Pro Stock in NHRA, and then I went back in NHRA, I wound up running Comp Eliminator for the last 6 months, and we had to use a 3-speed. And boy, I had a 53-pound flywheel that I put in this thing, and boy, on a full tree, you used to have to floor it by the second or third. You had and you'd leave as high as you could, and it only had a 245 low and a 145 second and 1 to 1/3. It was a Lenko, but it was a 3-speed Lenko, and the thing would stand up in the air and die and slow down and come down, and then it would go. So it was like 1,200 slower with the 3-speed than the 4-speed. But I'd leave as high as you could. And I used to come back and I'd see the telltale on the Moroso tack. And it was always 9,300. And I just figured, you know, I guess that's it. That's all she got. She ain't going nowhere. You know, we didn't have good springs or anything.
Right.
And so in my head, it was 9,300. So after that, I worked at Moroso. I was there about 8 months. And they had like, you know, the distributor machine, the Sun distributor machine, which I still have mine, which it still works fine. And in their tech, people would send stuff back, you know, for warranty, or they thought it was a problem. And the guy that was doing it, and he'd spin up, he had a distributor in there, and they had one of the original style Moroso tack. He'd spin it up, and he'd turn it all the way up, and it would go 9,300. And I go, oh, that's funny. When I raced him in the car, that's as high as the motors would ever go, was 9,300. He says, well, you know, that's not really true. I said, what are you talking about? He says, I'll show you. So he took the tack apart, and he showed me there was a stop in the back of the tack at 9,300 that stopped the needle from going, the telltale needle. Stopped. It was, and you couldn't see it from the front of the tack, but it was a safe, I guess, so that the tack wouldn't blow up if you overspun it. And it was just a stop, a stud sticking out and stopped it. I said, so all these years, I thought it was 9,300. I said, God knows what it was.
Right.
That's
10 grand.
It was, because after that, I was doing Ford Motors for a few guys, and one of the guys wanted me to drive his car, and he had the new Moroso tack, you know, the one that went to 12 grand.
Yeah.
And of course, you know, I drove it the same way. There was still no 2-step, and it just, you know, I just drove it. And I come back and I'm looking at the tack, and the son of a bitch is like 10.4. So I guess that's what I left at, you know, because that was always the highest RPM. You know, we didn't have slider clutches or anything. You know, you just left. And, you know, we shifted them around 92-ish. And they would go through over 93 because I was, you know, at the finish. So who knows? But same stuff. Just So you never know, that expression. It's not what you don't know that hurts you. It's what you don't know, but you think you know that really hurts you. You just know something that's wrong and you think it's right. And you go to the ends of the earth trying to figure it out. And that stopped a lot of racers because and I won't mention any names, but there were some pro stock guys that always thought that they were so smart that if they couldn't understand why something didn't work, there had to be a reason and it had to be something else. Whereas a lot of guys, and we just went from, if it works, it works. If it works, it's right. If it don't work, it's wrong. Who cares? Right? And one of the best guys I ever knew that thought like that was Frank Iaconia.
Right.
He was great guy. He never had the financial backing, to back then in those days. And he made use, I remember, just the greatest stuff. I mean, I could see him run. I wasn't, people thought I had a lot of money. I didn't have a lot of money, but I had enough because I had good sponsors. I knew I could sell my engines. I knew how to make money. And Frankie knew how to use stuff. He'd borrow, use, would change head gaskets, always put new head gaskets, so he made use of every nickel. And he just threw stuff at it, and whatever stuck, that was it. And now it's different. I'm sure he's well past that point. But he was great at that. And some of the other guys that thought they were rocket scientists, you ever notice sometimes guys would get into a 3 or 4 month, they wouldn't be running good.
Right.
And then they'd come back, and then they were good again. And those they got on a path, and they knew it had to work, and they were going to prove it had to work because they never wanted to admit that they had a bad idea. Wow. And again, it's not a bad idea; it just didn't work in this combination. So, and they would get caught up in that, trying to prove it right, and then they had these, bad spells, a slump. They'd have a 3-month slump, and then finally they'd give up and go back to what worked. But the smart guys just, and Glidden was like that, just keep throwing stuff at the wall, keep throwing it.
Yep.
I mean, he just did more of it and just learned with it. So it's different ways of racing. You get there the same way, but it's how you approach it.
So, I've been talking to Frank actually, and I met him at the racetrack last year. He does engines for Quadra Brothers Racing.
Yeah.
So he invited me as a guest there, and we hung out for the day. He's going to do a live chat like this. In fact, I had to call him back, but every time I call him, he's like, "Well, Tim, I'm flying off to Texas, so I can't do it this week." I said, "Okay, what about next?" Call me. He's always going back and forth, so he's always still busy.
Oh yeah, he's a great guy.
He is.
Sharp. It was just a terrible thing that happened when he lost his son. That just took the wind out of his sails. I know.
Oh yeah.
I know my brother had lost his son, and he was just never the same after that.
Wow.
And
I've never said anything to him yet.
Yeah, that's a personal thing, but
I try not.
But he perseveres through it, and he's still going strong.
He is,
Frankie.
110%, man, every day. That's for sure.
It's funny. Bill Jenkins. When I saw him at some nostalgia stuff.
Yeah.
Maybe just 5 years before. And we would talk occasionally, and he says, Scott, he said, of all of us guys, he says, you were the only one that really knew how to make it into a business. And I really appreciate it because I do pride I do. And it's hard, to be a business, you have to stick to the rules. You have to do it. You can bend, you don't break, it's just a whole different mindset. And there's a lot of great engine builders out there. Maybe they're not the best at business, and they wind up they lose they work 80 hours a week. They barely make it's bad because they never learn the art of really running a business, and how to do it, how to do advertising, how to promote, how to run it, where at least there's something for you at the end of the rainbow. A lot of these guys had nothing. Right. Even Jenkins, may rest in peace.
Yeah.
Never made it. Never really.
He never made it as a shop owner or builder, you're saying.
No, he was, such a great guy, bright, great stuff, and he never really monetized it. And I mean, he told me that. He says, you're one of the only ones that were able to take it and make it into a real business. And I'm proud of that. And that, you know, he'd recognize that. Now, Jack, look at Jack Rouse. Now, that man knows how to run business.
Yeah, he does.
I knows how to run a business. That I wish he was doing a little better physically. I would love to match race because he's got his 75 Mustang.
I know it. We got to do it.
And I don't know why he put a NASCAR engine in that mug.
I saw that. I know.
Why would you do that? But anyway, I said, could you imagine if we go to, you know, Indianapolis? And I mean, I just don't think Jack would be up to driving it anymore. But he, you know, he could be there. And
either I'll drive and he can ride with it.
Well, you know, I'm sure he could find, you know, his daughter or something. You know, he's got people that can race. And that would be fun if his daughter would drive. I don't know if she would. But that would be a cool
race,
thing.
So why wouldn't she? You know.
But you know, that's not really his car. I think that's kind of sort of a clone. I don't think that's really the original car.
I don't think so. I think that car got smashed, actually.
Yeah, the one that Chris has, that 3-door garage.
Yeah,
that is the car. I first saw that car. I was at a race at Moroso's track. I guess maybe in 2005. 4, something like that.
Okay.
And we were racing with Vinny, and I were racing, and a guy comes up to the trailer. Up there it is.
Yeah.
And he says, you know, I think I have your Mustang. I said, really? I said, okay. And we were busy. I says, where are you pitted? He says, oh, you know, I'm down there or over there. I says, okay, I'll come over. I said, well, is it still red? He said, oh, no, it's kind of a greenish. I said, okay, I'll look for it. It's not that many Mustang IIs at these races.
Right.
And so we had a lull in the action. I walk over there, and I see the car, and God bless it, was not my man. I didn't read the paint job. You know, you always say in body shops, well, somebody must have loved it. They painted it that color. But anyway, so I look at it, and I look around, and I look underneath in the back, because I remember I'd welded nuts on the bottom. We put studs to hold the ballast.
Okay.
And I get under the back of the car, and I see the nuts. Well, I said, son of a bitch, just the car. And then I look at it. Even the interior. Now, the dash was gone.
Yep.
We had, back then in those days, you had to run a stock appearing dash. And Harry Glass had made the dashes for Don Hardy. And the funny thing is, they were Pinto dashes. But he never made a dash that was a Mustang II dash.
Looks like this.
So they put Pintos. Yep.
Right there in the bottom corner, you can see the dash.
Right. And that car, but you know, a lot of guys just take the dash out. They had a tack and a couple of gauges. You know, that's before they didn't have these high dollar, you know, things that Holly sells.
Yeah.
So anyway, but the steering shaft was polished aluminum. And I remember the night I drove into Brooklyn, I had this guy that polished it. And I waited for it. And I remember the guy tells me, when you come in, he says, park in front of my shop. There's a hydrant right in front of my shop. He said, it's not a good neighborhood, especially for a white man. He says, so just come into the park in front of the hydrant. He says, don't worry about getting a ticket. He says, that's the safest spot. No one will bother you there. And I went upstairs, and he had all these things. And he polished the shaft the way it had come from Hardy. And that was still there. And in those days, you had to have, it had to be finished, the interior. Like the wheel tubs had to be covered. Yep. So when we got the car back home to Queens and it was painted, there was a guy that did convertible tops and vinyl roofs. And I told him, I said, I want to cover these tubs. I says, I need carpet here. And they said, but I want to cover they said, what could we do? He said, so he showed me Cadillac Landau used to have this real nice vinyl roof. It had all, it was soft, and it had, you know, it wasn't flat like the GM stuff. So we said, I'll use that material and I'll cover. So we covered the wheel tubs and the little area between the tubs. And that material is still in that car.
And you can see
it. You can see it. It's still the original interior. And Chris was there. So when I called Don Hardy, and I asked him if he had any more dashes. And he said, no, he doesn't. He said, but, you know, call Harry at Harry Glass. He might help you. So so anyway, so what happened is that guy at Moroso's track, I see the car, and it's my car. I know it's my car. So I said to him, I said, you know, if you ever want to sell it, call me first. He said, okay. So, and about a year and a half later or something, he called me. He says, you know what? I think I want to get a dragster. I said, I'm going to sell this thing. So I said, okay, you're going to run a Ford? He said, no, I'll put a Chevy in it, put a big black Chevy in it. I said, okay, we'll do a little horse trading.
Yeah.
So I think I traded him, it was either a short block or a long, it wasn't even a complete motor. I traded him a big block of 540 or something for the car. And it sat at my shop for a while, and I never really had time, you know, to play with it. And guy comes into that I knew. It was one of my fans. He was much younger, and he loved that car. And he was a Ford guy.
Yep.
I know a Ford guy like yourself. And he says, man, this car should be restored. He says, how about if I restore it, you build a motor for it, we can kind of be like partners in it. And I said, yeah, that's cool. That's great. He says, sell me the car, please, sell me the car. So I think I sold it for what I think the short block or whatever it was. It wasn't a lot of money.
Yep.
But the deal was he was going to restore it. And then his business got hurt with the economy. And in 08, you know, when everything slowed down. So the car sat and sat and sat. And finally, it wound up getting sold to Chris at Three Door Garage. And this guy is a master. I mean, that's his whole background. Was body shops. That's how he made his first money. He had a chain of body shops, and he just loved restoring cars. And the guy's an artist, so he wound up with the car. And then he calls me, and we started talking. We had all these pictures, and we go back and forth about what was this. We both got to remember this is over 50 years ago.
Oh yeah.
You know, and I'm trying to remember this stuff, and then we saw pictures, and it's built. And while you guys are out there looking, I'm still looking for a picture of the rear deck lid. That's the one thing that we never had a clear picture. And I knew there was some writing on it, and I just couldn't remember exactly what it said. And I've seen some blurry shots of it, but and Chris has left that, so it's not finished, just the deck lid. And because we had the original deck lid, you know, back in those days, you had a fiberglass deck lid, but you had to run stock glass. The windshield, the back window, the side, everything had to be original glass in Pro Stock. So we had this, if you know the way those Mustang IIs are, it was a huge piece of glass and just a little thin edge of the hatchback that lifted up. And you had to be so careful with it because the glass weighed 100 pounds and the fiberglass weighed 5 pounds. You know, you try not to crack it, you know. So that's why we used to put the gas cap, and we literally put the gas in the gas cap in the back, and we just had a hose because there were no fuel cells back then. It was just an aluminum tank with one or two baffles in it that Hardy made, and it just filled right from the gas cap. And as a matter of fact, I think the gas cap is original because I went to Auto Parts store and I bought a chrome gas because it looked good against the red, a chrome replacement gas cap. And when we got that car, we scratched all the paint off, and it was a chrome gas cap. So I like to believe, I'm not sure, but I like to believe that's the original gas cap that was on the car. But that car, the only thing that was changed, the rear end housing had been changed out. And, but it was the original fiberglass, the front end, the front brakes. Somebody had added a hoop in it, I guess, for more, you know, to get it certified, which Chris took out. He took that bar out. So that, the chassis, and it was all the original Hardy chassis, and that's back to exactly how it was, which NHRA will let the car run because it's a nostalgia thing, you know, and it's not going to go, you know, we'll run any eights with it. You know, I'm not going to try to make it go any faster. Right. You know, maybe, you know, 850 to 880, you know, whatever, something in that neighborhood. And, you know, it'll be great. I think people would love to see, because I guarantee you it will be the only original car from that era with the original driver, because there's nobody else left. They're all dying out. You know, I'm good friends with Herb McCandless, and it's some of my great guys. And I keep Herb and his son has found a bunch of his cars and restored them. I said, Herb, we should match race. Let's match race. We should do that. And I guess Herb that doesn't want, you know, his eyesight or whatever. He says, nah, it's not going to drive anymore. But I'd love to. I mean, hell, I got 3 cars that are faster than that thing, you know? So it's, let's do it. It'll be fun. I just, you know, get back in there doing the rosin burnouts. I just, man, that would be a blast doing that again. Scott, do you recognize this? What do we got? It says
Charlie Shafiroff Nelson. Hi, Dad. What's your favorite racing memory?
Oh, it's my daughter. Hey, Charlie. How are you, dear? Oh, my favorite racing? Uh, you know, it's like I had different lives. When you get a little, you had different segments of your life. I had, my youth in the street. I had my little professional career. Then I had the nitrous episodes, doing all that. And then I got seriously into the business end of it. And they're all great. They're all great memories. And it, my daughter got to see a little bit of it. I had promised, my wife at the time that when she was born, that she was afraid she didn't want me to drive in the race cars anymore. And I didn't. I stopped.
Okay.
And then years later, I picked it back up and, she got to see me race a little bit. But no, they were all different in different ways. In the, at stages of your life, there are certain things that are just great, and it's just like having a child. Charlie is my only daughter, my only child. I don't have any sons. Okay. But so that's a whole nother thing. Such a wonderful thing that is. And having grandkids, I have three grandkids. She has 3 girls, and that's a whole wonderful thing right there. But in racing, let me tell you, the Mustang is pretty damn near up there at the top of the list. That was a great car. That one, and I remember the first top sportsman, the one I got, that Tim McCamus, he actually built it. He was a world championship in that car. And Tim and I were good friends. And I bought that car. And through one of my customers, but that's a crazy story. But anyway, I wound up with that car. And that thing was like a Cadillac next to all these short wheelbase cars that they were all 93, 95, 96 inch wheelbase cars, and they go to a full wheelbase, what was it, whatever it was, 112, whatever, it was like driving a Cadillac, a more modern car. The first time I drove that, it had a 2-step and had shift lights and all this. Imagine that. A computer. It was like impossible, to get to drive it. But anyway, Charlie, they were all great. All the memories. You get older and you look back at this stuff, and it was everything in its time. Just like the mechanics of racing, in its time, what we did, that was great. And it's a different time, so there's different things that you do. But they're all good, and in fact, you can still look back and smile. That's a blessing.
It is. It's like I'm stuck in 1975.
That
was like the happiest time of my life, I think, of being 10 years old at that time.
Yeah, I was lucky. I had a great childhood.
Oh yeah.
Introduced to I love boating. I used to race boats before I raced cars, and I love the water, and but I love racing. I was going to be a pilot.
Wow.
When I graduated from high school, I was accepted into the Air Force Academy. And so I didn't even apply to colleges because my dad knew, so you had to be appointed by a senator to even get into the academy. So I had all that done, and my grades were great. I was a great student. And so we went out. You had to do your physical before you entered.
Yep.
And you see, I'm wearing glasses. My eyesight was just changing at that time. And in those years, when you go to the Air Force Academy, if you wanted to go there for pilot training, you had to have 20/20 vision.
Yeah.
And I took the exam, and I just didn't have 20/20. And the guy said, that's really a shame, that if you had 20/20 the day you were accepted, and the next day your eyes turned and they were correctable to 20/20, that was okay with the Air Force. But they wouldn't take you in if you had less than, if you were 18 years old and you had less than 20/20. I guess they figured, maybe your eyesight's not going to be so good, for them to spend millions of dollars training you.
Right.
That they figured that. So the guy says to me, well, you can't be admitted for pilot, but you can still go to the Air Force Academy. It was free. It was a great school. And I said, why would I want to go to the Air Force Academy? I just want to fly jet planes. I wanted to hit the afterburners. I wanted to race the plane. That's all I wanted to do. And some other stuff, which I won't even say, but I like shooting stuff. I was quite a marksman. I was a state champion in the 60s.
Were you really?
I used to shoot 6 days a week.
Wow.
That was one of my little fun things. So I wanted to fly jet planes, and I used to say and blow shit up. You know.
Yeah, there it is.
Of course, those weren't great years. You know, that was 60. I graduated in 67. You know, so Vietnam was just. But you know, you didn't care. You're a kid. Just wanted to fly planes, and so that didn't work out. So I had to race cars. That was the best thing.
My son, the race cars.
If I couldn't fly jet planes, I figured I'd just race cars. And that was good. So
here's one from Anthony I. Cavino. Austin Craig, my close friend at work, Shelby American Las Vegas, tells me amazing stories about his close and personal friends Lee Krupai and Carmen Rotunda.
Okay.
Scott, did you know either of them?
I knew Carmen slightly. You know, we were in the same division.
Okay.
And you know, he had some pro stock stuff at the same time. But they were from Philly area. You know, we didn't hang down there.
Here's a good one for you. Jesse Bishel. This is cool. Worked for Scott for years. Got my start with engines at his place.
Oh, yeah. You know, it's funny. I still have a box of work. Everybody that ever worked for me, I had like on a 3x5 card.
Okay.
You know, I had everybody's name and when they started and salaries, and it was cool.
Yep.
And there's been a few of them, and again, you get a little older, the names kind of fade away. But I've had I remember Jesse, but there's been a lot of guys. I've started a bunch of engine shops over the years, and there's nothing wrong with that. If a guy's honest with you and says, "Listen, I want to try to do it on my own, and I'm going to go out and do it," that's great. You know, just don't steal my help or my customers. you're glad to do it. So it's cool. But yet at the same time, I've got a bunch of guys work for me well over 20 years. You know, I had people that their kids work for me. So I've had a lot of, you know, a lot of guys still strong, still there.
You know, I went to, yesterday I was at John Kyle's shop, APD, Advanced Products.
John, yes.
So him and I are doing a carb tuning series now with his carburetors. So I was there yesterday spending some time with him. He speaks very highly of you. And he said, one of the stories he told me when he first met you, he was talking to you about carburetors, and you looked at him and he said, "What the hell are you going to teach me about carburetors, kid?" Something like that. And that stuck in my head. It's so funny, you know, to hear him talk about you two and your relationship and how, you know, he sent a carburetor and it picked up some horsepower or made some differences. And
John is an amazing guy. I admire him. He's got balls. When he wants to do something, he just does it. He's fearless. He'll buy, you know, CNC machinery, and just make stuff. He said, if I can't buy it, I'll just make it, you know. And I was always kind of, you know, I was never a real machinist. I mean, I did some minor stuff, you know, back in the day, just a little honing, but I was not a machinist.
Okay.
And yeah, John, maybe that wasn't his forte, but he made himself that. You know, like Sonny was like that. He made him, and I respected that. My talent was finding the right people that could make this stuff, and I thought of myself as the chef. Okay. I took all these ingredients, put them all together, and made the end result, which is just as important, just a different way of doing it.
Sure.
You know, I didn't have to turn the handle and push the button and make the part. I just knew which parts worked with other parts that, you know, gave you that happy combination. It's so easy to see when you have a happy combination, you know, how they run. And not always easy to come by, but once you have it, it's great. And that's how we like to sell engines that are, you know, happy engines, engines. So, but John is an amazing guy. Cylinder head guy, carpenter, the guy does it all. He's a cool dude.
He is.
His sidekick Joe, they're great. These guys are backbone of the sport, and you know, just good stuff. Yeah.
Good to be. It's an honor for me to help them out and work with them.
Yeah, he's the real deal.
Perfect. The Bill Ferretti says, Tim, need to get Scott back. He's got so much to say that needs to be said. Very informative and entertaining. You know.
Okay.
Well, we had talked about this. We're talking for 2 hours already.
Really?
Over 2 hours, 112 people here on average since we started. So it's like, I told you, we thought, well, how's it going to go? Do you think we're going to have to ask questions and write stuff down? And it doesn't work that way. I mean, it's just natural. You know, you start talking and telling your story.
I know you're a Ford guy, but you know, one of the that's okay. One of the, I was for a little time myself.
Well, yeah.
And let me tell you, Ford stuff, we laughed at it back in the day, but we do it now. We do a bunch of Windsor stuff, 8.2 deck, 9.5 deck stuff. Great, phenomenal street engines. They're absolutely superior to the conventional small block Chevy, no question. And I never would have even dreamt that. You know, I knew the Cleveland was good.
Yeah.
But when you compare, you know, just straight up, you know, just high, you know, good 23-degree stuff versus the Windsor 20 degrees, no comparison. The Ford stuff is so much better and consistent. It's impressive. I kind of almost wish I would have started with that, but I didn't. You know, the path didn't go that way.
We'll forgive you for that.
But you know, it'd be fun to do a whole thing on nitrous because that's a whole nother world.
We should. We could do another talk. Whatever. We could talk about your nitrous. Just
you could get some of the other guys. You know, maybe the guys from NOS. You put a few people up on the screen there.
Yeah.
How nitrous really started, and you know, it's different today with fuel injection and nitrous, but I think the audience would love that, and some of the stuff, the Moroso stuff that we did was just.
Are you willing to do it? Come back again and spend and maybe just do.
Sure. What else am I going to do on a Sunday night?
There it is, DragBoss Garage. The one and only.
All right. I don't know about you. I didn't have dinner yet. I'm hungry. So.
I am too. Here's what we got to do. Maybe you could help me get Larry Lombardo. You know, I've talked to his wife. I sent a message to her at one time. What do you know? Let's get him on here. I'll get Frank on here next.
Yeah, Larry was fun. You know, he kind of, you know, he's so deeply in his business now is all circle track. You know, he doesn't do much drag race stuff at all. You know, Frankie's another thing. Frankie was, and he stayed with it and stayed with it and stayed with it and stayed with it. And I'm glad to see he's having some success. But yeah, there's plenty of stories. You know, they don't call them the good old days for nothing.
Man, ain't that the truth?
All right.
Here, look at this one. It says here, Tim, we could do a mini series full of Scott's fascinating endeavors, like season 1, 2, and 3.
Ooh. Who knows? All right.
All right.
Sounds good.
Perfect. Scott, I appreciate you taking the time away from your family, spending time here at DragBoss Garage. Guys that are on here, there's still over 100 people on here. Please make sure you like and subscribe this live chat and my channel. Subscribe if you haven't. It's free to subscribe. And I guarantee through Scott, we'll bring more information because knowledge is power, and we'll meet some more superstars. I guarantee it.
All right.
All right.
So long, guys.
All right, guys. Thumbs up.
All right. Thank
you. See you, Scott.
Take
Talk
care.
to you. Bye. There you go, guys. Before I click it off there, Scott's signed out. I appreciate you guys being here. Thanks for being at the live chat. Wednesday, tentatively, I may have John Calvert on, and we're going to talk about leaf spring suspension and drag racing with leaf springs and Caltrack systems. So stay tuned to DragBoss Garage. We're always seeing and learning something new.